Now, you may be asking yourself after clicking on this, why is this dude talking about a movie that was released 60 years ago? What's the point in covering a movie that no one really talks about nowadays? Well, to answer those questions, because I want to. In case you're new to my channel, this is a video series that I do highlighting my top 100 favorite movies of all time. It's where the name of my channel, 100 Movie Marathon, comes from. This is my personal favorite list and it spans all sorts of genres and decades. As a matter of fact, number 84 last month was Batman Begins. But today I want to travel back to the mid-1950s and talk about a classic Western film starring one of the biggest movie stars of all time, John Wayne, and directed by one of the greatest of all time, John Ford. Today I'm talking about number 83 on the 100 Movie Marathon, The Searchers. The way that this video is going to be structured is I'm going to talk about some of the aspects I love about this film, some of the background behind it, and then I'll get into spoilers here. So if you haven't seen The Searchers, I will give you a warning before I get into spoilery aspects of the film. The Searchers was released on May 16th, 1956 and is based on a book based on a true story. That true story being that of Cynthia Ann Parker. Way back in 1836, Parker was captured by Comanches and lived amongst them for 24 years, adopting their culture, their language, and even marrying their chief, Pita Nakona. Parker, now going by her Comanche name Nadua, went on to have 3 children with Chief Nakona during her time with the tribe. Now, I don't want to spoil this movie in case you haven't seen it before. I will circle back to what happened with Nadua at the end of the video once I've actually talked about this film a little bit more, but as you can expect, her family spent all those 24 years searching for her, never stopping in their search to find their beloved family member. The Searchers chronicles this tale from the perspective of the family members, headed up by John Wayne's Ethan Edwards, whose nieces, like Nadua, abducted by Comanches. And the previously mentioned star, John Wayne, was already one of the biggest movie stars in the world. Wayne had garnered acclaim for his many film roles up to that point, many of which were westerns. For many at the time, and even to this day, Wayne embodied the classic American cowboy. When evaluating which actors had sold the most amount of movie tickets, it was estimated that movies with John Wayne had sold 1.114 billion tickets, which at the time of that poll in 2000 was second only to Clark Gable. That's the kind of movie star we're talking about here. The film's director, John Ford, is regularly listed as one of the greatest directors of all time. Not only did he win 7 Oscars, direct 140 films, direct some all-time classics like this film, The Grapes of Wrath and Stagecoach, but he also served as the head of the photographic unit for the Office of Strategic Services, was a commander in the Navy Reserve during World War II, and was even present on Omaha Beach during D-Day. He directed the filming of the landing behind obstacles on the actual beach. At one point, he even took a bullet while filming for the Navy during the war. Needless to say, this guy was a badass. Many directors have praised John Ford's direction, with Steven Spielberg going as far as to feature him as a character in The Fabelmans and dubbing him the greatest director of all time. Other directors like Alfred Hitchcock have said that a John Ford film was a visual gratification, or my favorite quote I found while doing research for this video, Orson Welles saying when asked about directors he liked, saying, "I like the old masters," by which I mean John Ford, and John Ford. And when watching The Searchers, it's easy to see why this man has garnered so much praise. Themes and storylines aside, this is just a flat-out gorgeous film to watch. Shot on location in Monument Valley in the Arizona-Utah area, you could literally have the screen muted and still find entertainment here. But then on top of this beautiful backdrop, it's layered in with a complicated hero in Ethan Edwards, who is a Civil War veteran. And he wasn't on the side that won the Civil War, if that tells you anything. This character in particular helps this film go past visually stimulating shots to a story that engages you from start to finish. Ethan Edwards is a very lonely person. You're introduced to him as he rides into his brother's house alone. He spent the last 3 years after the Civil War fighting in the Mexican Revolutionary War and doesn't appear to know how to simply put down the gun and live his life. There's always some sort of fight with him. So right away, you see while he loves his family and he enjoys being around them, it's not set to last very long. It's hard to say what the root of Ethan's loneliness is, but it is a key component to his character in the film. Even after his niece gets kidnapped and his adopted nephew, Martin, insists on tagging along, Ethan is hesitant to let him join. He constantly pushes back at Martin, saying that they aren't blood related. That even though Martin was adopted by Ethan's brother, he is no kin to him. Ethan's relationship to Martin represents his overall feelings towards Native Americans in the film. You see, Martin is actually 1/8 Cherokee, and when Ethan finds this out at the beginning of the film, he calls him a name that I won't repeat here in the video. Despite the fact that Martin was welcomed into Ethan's brother's home with open arms, Ethan himself can't help but hold resentment against him because of his background. While that way of thinking is obviously not right, it's clear to see why Ethan thinks the way he does. It's been instilled in him to have this deep resentment for other cultures, including Native Americans, really anyone who presents a challenge to his way of life. In my view, Ethan represents the old American cowboy fighting for the traditional way of life. Or I guess the traditional way of life up to that point. While we tend to glorify this sort of iconic American cowboy figure, it has a history of being at the expense of another culture's way of life, particularly that of the Native Americans. So as Ethan moves through the film, you're constantly questioning whether or not he's acting for the ultimate goal of finding his niece, or if he's trying to exact revenge against the Comanches out of spite. However, we do see Ethan's relationship with Martin grow throughout the film. We even get a nice scene near the end of the film whenever Ethan reveals to Martin that should anything happen to him, he's set to give Martin everything he owns. Regardless of what you take away from the character of Ethan in the film, you've got to admit that this adds a whole new layer of depth to him. That instead of going the clear-cut route and giving us a resilient hero who's perfect in every way, John Ford gave us someone we can be conflicted about. And it's impossible to think about this movie without thinking about the time that it was released with the Civil Rights Movement. More and more was changing in the country, and Ford gave us a character who, in any other movie, would just be this perfect figure, but no, he gave us someone who's very complicated and holds deep resentment to other cultures. Someone who could potentially serve as a mirror to society at the time of this film's release. John Wayne was also perfectly casted as Ethan. Not only was his performance just fantastic in the film, but he was the perfect choice whenever casting this sort of old school American cowboy that people want to root for, but then they get to know his character and they're like, I don't know if I agree with everything that you think about Ethan. In my opinion, it's his best and most nuanced work. He had a lot he had to get across with Ethan, and it never felt one note from him. Excellent, excellent job. I also want to highlight the supporting work of Jeffrey Hunter, who plays Martin Prowley in the film. Hunter's name may not sound familiar to the masses anymore, but he was an up-and-coming star at the time and had already been the lead in studio films. He was going through a bit of a slump before this film was made, and this helped rejuvenate his career. It was going to be hard acting alongside John Wayne's Ethan here, and I thought that Hunter did an exceptional job. He's playing a young guy who hasn't had the chance to let the world jade him like Ethan has. This is a light spoiler, but even when Ethan has sort of given up on Debbie, Martin insists that his sister is still there. That even while she has been living amongst the Comanches, it doesn't mean that she still isn't his niece. I love that we had a character like Martin here showing an example of what acceptance could look like in this world. He also did the job of any good supporting character and progressed Ethan's story effectively. He provided a challenge to Ethan's line of thought and way of life. Through the years that the two spend with one another trying to find Debbie, you can tell that Martin has changed Ethan, even if it's a slight change. This film is one of the best westerns ever made, in my opinion, because it not only gives us these practical set pieces designed to harken back to the culture it's depicting, but it also gives us a mental conflict with the story. It has so much to say about how we treat other cultures, the flawed nature of the old beloved Western cowboy and what makes us human, all while giving us a very flawed protagonist that I can see a lot of people having a problem with today. But I argue that that's the entire point of Ethan. John Ford's one of those filmmakers where everything has a purpose behind being in this film. His depiction of Ethan was absolutely no accident, and I think it took a lot of guts to hinge this film on that character. What it does is it gets you thinking. Because in any other generic Western movie, he'd just be our hero, and that's his personality trait. The Searchers takes this character study a step further and even uses its vast landscape to represent the loneliness of Ethan and people like him. Just how lonely the life of the old American cowboy can truly be. I'm gonna dive into spoilers about the end of the film now. If you haven't seen The Searchers, please give it a watch. It is well worth your time. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're hopping off now, and leave a like, it really helps. Okay, so there was no way I was gonna be able to make this video without talking about the rescue of Debbie at the end. Initially, I praised the film for portraying Debbie as a member of the Comanche. She doesn't want to go with Ethan and Martin. She's a member of that community now. She was raised there. It's her home. How Ethan reacts to this is what makes me believe that this whole time he was acting out of spite. He wanted to go kill Comanches the entire film, because as soon as she declares that she doesn't want to go with him, he's basically like, okay, she's just another Comanche. And if it weren't for Martin protecting her, Ethan would have killed Debbie, I believe. Further pushing forward the message of just how flawed Ethan's mindset is. How poisoned with hate and resentment someone's mind can be, despite aspects about them that are admirable. That now he's literally willing to kill someone blood related to him because she's one of them. Also, it presses forward Martin's character, who doesn't care that she identifies as a Comanche. She's still his sister even if they're not blood. I think Martin's background of being 1/8 Comanche is part of what makes him so accepting towards it. We've seen throughout the film that Martin can take the deep-rooted hatred Ethan has for him. But now, after so many years and making it so far, he's not going to let Ethan take it a step further with Debbie. Where the movie ends up taking a step down for me is whenever Debbie decides to leave with Martin and Ethan at the end. And I guess not necessarily that decision, but just how quick she made that turn. I may be missing a theme in there, but it just felt very sudden, and it just made it feel like they wanted a happy ending for our main characters in the films, therefore she had to go with them at the end. But man, you have got to love that closing shot of Ethan in the doorway, walking away alone into the vastness of the old American West. From whence he came, he returns. Stunning shot. Man, John Ford is good. Ultimately, though, I don't think that there's a way I can end this video without circling back to what happened to Cynthia Ann Parker, or Nadua. The last battle of the film simulates the real-life Battle of Peace River, where Texas Rangers found Nadua. She, like Debbie in the film, identified as Comanche at that point in her life. She didn't want to go back to her biological family because she had spent 24 years with the Comanches. They were her home at that point. The Rangers killed anywhere between 6 to 12 members of the Comanche tribe that day, and Nadua never forgave them for it. And she refused to adjust to society for the rest of her life after returning home. I thought the film had a golden opportunity to end in that way, where either Debbie doesn't go back with them or she holds a lot of resentment for them for taking her away from what's her home at that point. And it felt kind of easy just to have her be like, yes, please save me, after she had already professed to them that she was a Comanche then. Again, I could just be missing a theme, but it just felt so sudden, and they missed out on something that I feel like could have been a more impactful ending and could have ended on a sort of tribute for Nadua. Ultimately, though, it's a movie and it's not perfect. I think the good far outweighs the bad, but I just wanted to highlight the real-life story of Nadua here and help spread her real story. Because ultimately, while she was taken as a child and returned back to her family, she was an adult whenever they found her and didn't want to go back. She had a family and she never wound up up assimilating back to her culture that she was born into. I'm sure that there's a lot of different opinions that people have about what the right move with her was, so it is a real moral dilemma for you to think about. It's a fascinating story, and I can't help but feel for Nadua, who sadly passed away at the age of 43. Her son, Quanah Parker, eventually became the chief of the Comanches in the years to come. I encourage all of you, assuming that you've seen The Searchers, if you're this far into the video, I'm assuming that you have, I encourage all of you to take some time and really reflect on the film and see what it means to you. This is a movie that begs to be analyzed and in general is just a beautiful piece of film. I'm happy that for this video I got to sit down, do some research, and really reflect on what the film means to me. Ethan Edwards is just one of the most thought-provoking protagonists in a movie that I think I've ever seen. John Ford really gets you thinking with this one. But anyway, that's everything that I had to talk about today. Thank you so much for watching the video up to this point. Be sure to subscribe if you aren't already, and I will see you guys next time.